Let's go ahead and provision a new SQL DW database. The overall steps we're going to follow is we're going to choose the tool or the method that we're going to use. We're going to then pass the values for the core settings that we need to the server. We'll then wait a few minutes, and finally we'll be able to connect from our client tool of choice. So as for the tools, let's take a brief look at what the experience will look like in the Azure portal. Let's take a look at a representative PowerShell script, and let's take a look at T-SQL. We will see more fleshed out versions of these in the upcoming demos. So as far as the portal goes, it's going to be a very straightforward process. From the Azure portal, you'll tell the portal that you want a new resource. If you're going through the current version of the portal, you'll then need to pick a category from the marketplace. So new and then database, and you should see SQL Data Warehouse as part of the selection. Once you've chosen SQL Data Warehouse, you'll see a blade where you can fill out the properties that you need to supply. And at a minimum, as we've discussed, those will include the name of the database, which needs to be unique to the server. You'll need to specify what the subscription is that you're using. You'll specify whether you want to use an existing resource group or you want to create a new one. And then you can choose a source, and that source can be a blank database. You can load it with sample data, or you can choose to restore from a backup of another SQL Data Warehouse. You'll then pick the server that you want to put this database on, and you'll have that opportunity to create a new server here if you so desire. You can then choose to change the default collation, which is the character set and sort order that the data will be using. And then finally, at this level, you'll choose what your starting performance is going to be in DWUs. And so this screenshot shows us with the default setting of 400, and it gives me a kind of a billable estimate of what that looks like. Once you've filled this out, you'll be able to accept your choices. You'll sit back and wait a few minutes, and then you'll be able to review the created, the provisioned data warehouse and its settings. Looking at PowerShell, there are going to be 3 core commandlets that you'll use. Ultimately, it's all about calling into the third one on my screen here, which is new Azure RM SQL database, where you'll pass in a minimum of some required parameters, such as the requested service objective name, which in this case is going to be DW400, the name of the database, the name of the server, the resource group name, and the addition. Now, the addition is kind of new if you're used to using PowerShell to configure and provision SQL Server on premises or SQL Database in Azure. It's that addition parameter here that specifies that you're creating a SQL DW. Now, to be able to do that, you need to be connected with your subscription. So I'm sort of going backward here. Prior to this, you'll be calling get Azure RM subscription, and there are some parameters that you'll use there to tell it what subscription you're using. And prior to that, you'll be logging into your account. And so I've just left off, for brevity, the parameters for being able to log in and get that data. But the general sequence is going to be log into your account, point out your subscription, and from within that prescription, then create the new database. There are additional optional parameters in new Azure RM SQL database. They include things like collation and max size and some other things that you'll either see in the portal or you'll see in the reference. Next up, looking at T-SQL. Once again, with T-SQL, we can't provision a server. The server has to exist already, but we can create a database once we've connected to that server. So using your T-SQL tool of choice, maybe that's SQL Server Management Studio or Visual Studio or SQL Command from the command line, one way or another, you're going to execute a create database command. And what should be familiar now is we're specifying the name of the database, a collation, the addition, the service objective, and in this case, I'm showing max size as well. And just as a reminder, you'll need to have created the logical server already, which you can do in the portal or with PowerShell. So in all 3 of these cases, using the portal or using PowerShell or using T-SQL, once you submit that command, it will take a few minutes to provision and ready your new server, which gives you an opportunity to think about the kinds of things that you want to do after the server has been provisioned. And we'll cover these in their appropriate detail in later sections in the course. But at a high level, you want to be thinking about firewall rules, who's going to be allowed to connect to this server. In some deployments, for example, you're only setting it up so that an on-premises BI tool, such as SQL Server Reporting Services, can access the warehouse. In others, you're setting it up so that a whole range of desktops running Power BI could connect. So you'll need to know what the IP addresses are that you'll be using. You'll also want to document the connection strings, and those are easily seen in the portal, but you'll need those connection strings to be able to, well, connect from your client tools and from applications that are going to be connecting to the warehouse. Beyond simple authentication of administrators, you want to be thinking in terms of security roles. And a very useful thing to do is to create read users and create load users and assign the appropriate permissions so that your read users are granted only permission to read the data, that's the name, running selects, for example. And your load user is given special permissions to be able to load data from sources. And we'll touch on each of those in their appropriate section. You'll also want to be thinking about a monitoring strategy. We'll talk more about this in Module 4, but through what's available in the portal or through dynamic management views, or DMVs, you'll see there's a wide range of information you can look at to see what's going on the server and be able to see what queries are run and where you might have any bottlenecks. You'll also want to think about data recovery, and this winds up being a simpler thing with SQL DW than it does with an on-premises SQL Server. I don't take backups. Azure does this for me, and we'll get into the mechanics of that in Module 4. But I do want to think about how I want to take advantage of those backups to be able to restore, either to a point in time or restoring as a way of creating a new instance of this warehouse in a new geo-region. More on that in Module 4. And then finally, you want to be thinking about where your source data is going to be, and is there anything you'll need to set up so that the data warehouse can read it. If you're pushing data up from, say, AZ Copy or from SQL Server Integration Services, there's going to be a different set of connections than if you're using something like Azure Data Factory, or you're going to read from blobs in Azure Storage. Again, we'll talk about these in Module 3, but you definitely want to have your ducks in a row as far as this is concerned. So with any luck, the time it took me to talk through this was enough time for Azure to provision a data warehouse, and we'll move into looking at this in more depth and starting to load the data in upcoming sections.